I can remember when I was first watching this episode thinking about just how similar it is to an old musical from decades ago, The Music Man. Both Flim and Flam share quite a few similarities to Professor Harold Hill in their demeanor, and even their song is quite reminiscent of Trouble from that same musical. So this episode hit home for me in particular because I actually performed in this musical on stage many years back by playing the bass part of the Barbershop Quartet. It makes a story a lot more fun when it helps you remember good times past, but putting aside my feelings of nostalgia, just how well does the story hold up? As the episode begins, we see Fluttershy being awoken in the early hours of the morning by Rainbow Dash. Apparently it's the start of cider season, and Rainbow is determined to get a taste of cider this year since she had missed out on all the previous years. But they are surprised to see that there is already a very long line of ponies who had come up with the same idea. And Pinkie Pie is right at the front of the line, and apparently was sleeping in her tent along with a bunch of balloons? A rather odd sight indeed, but this is just Pinkie being Pinkie. We see quite a few ponies getting their cup of cider, along with Pinkie walking off with more than half a dozen of her own. Once again, Pinkie seems to be thinking about her own enjoyment before anyone else's. But the Apple family weren't able to make quite enough for everyone, just like in previous years. This is especially unsettling for Rainbow Dash as she is consistently unable to get any cider. Applejack tries to remind everyone that the Apple family recipe only uses the best apples and that making the cider takes time. But this still isn't enough to satisfy the needs of all the residents in Ponyville. Enter Flim and Flam aboard their super speedy cider Squeezy 6000. And they are able to explain their plan of providing cider to all the town of Ponyville through a very catchy song. This really is the most enjoyable part of the episode, seeing Flim and Flam mesmerize everyone in a matter of minutes through some rather clever lyrics. And they are able to show that their machine can make some really good cider quite a bit faster than the Apple family can. Even Granny Smith shows that this cider is just as good as their recipe. But when the time comes to choose whether to work with Flim and Flam, Granny Smith still insists that there is no way that a machine compares to the care that the Apple family puts into their cider. Seems to me that Granny Smith may be a bit in denial here, as she was impressed with how their cider turned out. And Apple Bloom makes a very good argument by pointing out that with this new machine they could produce enough cider for everyone in Ponyville. But Applejack is hesitant, as they have always made cider the same way. I was feeling rather curious about this situation, as it does seem like a good idea to at least try out. That is until Flim and Flam insist that by using their machine, the profits would be split 75-25 in the brothers' favor. Applejack figures that by taking such a large cut out of their profits, that they would end up losing Sweet Apple Acres by not making enough to last out the season. I can admit that that reasoning seems a bit odd, as I can't quite understand why the whole farm would fail if they had even one season of not making enough money. Does the Apple family not have anything put aside in savings? Did they end up mortgaging the farm just to make ends meet at some point? Is there some kind of heavy tax on farmland throughout Equestria that they wouldn't be able to pay without a successful cider season? Well, putting aside this rather weak element to the plot, I did end up noticing a bit more about Flim and Flam's methods that I hadn't thought of before. They end up making one offer of partnership with the Apple family that actually seems rather unfair, given that they can't even make one barrel of cider without a supply of apples. And when the Apple family turns them down, they don't even try to offer anything more reasonable, and immediately tell them that they're going to be competitors. The way that Flim and Flam had set up this situation, managing to get everyone so excited about their machine so easily, tells me that they had been planning on driving out the Apple family right from the start. The fact that they knew exactly what to say in order to get the entire town in the palm of their hand shows just how good they are at selling their product. But they don't even attempt to sell their idea to the Apple family, beyond that first offer that would likely have been refused in the first place. Throughout this entire episode, Flim and Flam are going through each step with careful planning, all the while making their efforts sound like they have the town's best interests at heart, a rather interesting con to say the least. And the next day, their plan is further set into motion once the Apple family has run out of cider to sell again. It really doesn't take much to convince the whole town that the Apple family needs to do something to satisfy Ponyville's need for cider, and the Flim Flam brothers are subtly driving the situation even more to their advantage. There really is no reason for the Apple family to take part in their bet, and yet Granny Smith apparently can't abide being called a chicken. In fact, the only reason that Flim and Flam end up running into any issues is when they start to show the same overconfidence that Granny Smith did. Once the rest of the main six join in the competition, Flim and Flam make one mistake in their grand plan by caring more about the competition rather than the cider they are making. I do like the fact that the writers are showing a bit of continuity here by allowing Applejack to accept help from others. This shows that Applebuck's season wasn't just a one-time deal for Applejack's character. There is also a bit of a nod to Fall Weather Friends when Applejack reminds Rainbow that there is no point to winning if they cheat, which is something else I hadn't noticed before. And it's enjoyable to hear Applejack talk about not learning anything at the end of the episode, as it helps add to how much this episode stands out from the others. But I have to admit that there are a number of holes in the overall plot. I've already mentioned how it seems rather confusing that the Apple family would lose the farm because of not making enough money from one cider season. Both Flim and Flam end up winning the bet to be the exclusive sellers of cider in all of Ponyville, but when the citizens start complaining about a few barrels of bad cider, they decide it would be better to just leave town forever rather than break out the good quality cider that they made earlier on. I also don't like the fact that the Apple family didn't do anything to improve upon their methods other than adding some more ponies to the process. I mean, they could have ended this episode with Flim and Flam learning to play more fair and actually use their machine to provide enough cider for everyone in all the years to come. You'd better hope that the Apple family finds something to improve their methods next year, otherwise they'll still run into the same problem of not having enough cider to go around. But, despite its flaws and even how predictable the story is, the episode is still a lot of fun to watch. Both Flim and Flam turn in some very fun performances. Their song continues to be very catchy even after I've been listening to it more than a dozen times. Rainbow's reactions to not getting her cider makes for a humorous little subplot. She ends up having the most rotten luck in this episode. I just have to remember to put aside some of the plot holes and enjoy what I'm seeing. But what do you think? Do you have any ideas on how we could tweak this episode to fix some of the plot holes and put in a more relevant lesson? Is there more of a reason why Applejack's family would end up losing the farm in this episode other than just for plot convenience? Is there anything about this episode that you hadn't noticed before? I would like to hear your thoughts on the Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000, and as for me, I ought to look into getting back into singing again. I am DRWolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.
That's made from Apple Family apples. Is this some kind of cruel joke?